Okay. All right, well, good morning, everyone. We're back at it again. The last thing that we talked about, I believe, was David facing off on Goliath. We talked about shepherding as well and some of the characteristics of a shepherd, how that these events in David's lives as a shepherd really, it was almost practice for him fighting Goliath. It gave him courage, it gave him strength. He had a tremendous amount of faith in God. A lot of great lessons for us in our day-to-day lives. So Goliath is going to be killed by David. It must have been an incredible, sight to witness. It's kind of like one of those things where, if you could go back in time, where would you go? I would definitely like to see David killing Goliath. That would be pretty cool. A lot of different events, obviously. The Philistines, they're going to see Goliath fall. David's going to cut off his head, show it to everybody. Place goes crazy. And Israel is going to rout the Philistines. It's going to be a massive victory for Israel, an incredible victory. The Philistines are going to be put to the worst to the Hebrews, and Saul is going to be a great hero as the king. But there's also going to be a greater hero, and that is going to be David, and the people are going to recognize this. And this is really, I think, is going to be the beginning of Saul's intense jealousy for David. There's no question, right? And so they're coming back from the slaughter of the Philistines. The women are singing, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Uh-oh. So even, the populace are noticing that there's something special about David. He's even a better warrior. It sounds like the women are saying, as they cheer for the warriors coming back from the battle, they're cheering and saying that David's a better warrior than Saul. Ooh, right? That's going to be problematic. Saul becomes afraid of David. Let's take a look at this in 1 Samuel 18. In the, we'll take a look at that 7th verse there, but actually in verse 5, and David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Doing great. It's a good hire, brought David in, great warrior. He behaved himself wisely. So not only was he a great warrior, it sounds like he had the ability to get along with people. I don't want to call him a good politician, but he had good interpersonal skills. People liked being around David. He had good leadership skills. He wasn't causing problems, right? A lot of people, you bring somebody on, on a team or something like that, and that person can, have a lot of skill. But if they're a bad teammate or a bad locker room guy, it's going to have a negative effect, obviously, on the team. This was not the case with David. He was brought in, and he was really a great addition to Saul and to the governmental structure in Saul's government. But Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s in verse 7. Verse 8, and Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. Uh-oh. Right? It's kind of like Saul is sulking a little bit. He said, David at 10,000. I'm like, oh, 1,000. So he had his eye on David, what's this guy? He's probably going to take my kingdom too, So Saul is going to stop playing political games like, giving David his daughter Michal in marriage, right? Keep your enemies closer to you, right? Bringing him in, being part of the family. And in fact, yes, in the Middle Ages, in the Bronze Age, in any human civilization, particularly with the leadership This is one way that you would try to stop fighting and bring somebody who was an enemy into your clan or your group, and that was by marriage. Marriage was a big thing. Particularly, when we think about these marriages with kings and queens and stuff like that, we think about the Middle Ages and these arranged marriages that would happen to kids that were like 5 and 6 years old. They obviously wouldn't consummate the marriage or anything like that, but they would be legally married until they were old enough to be married. And so this happened all the time, and it would try, you become family. So, usually the thought process is, okay, they're part of the family, part of the group, we're not going to have any more fighting. But oftentimes you had more fighting because now it's internalized and there's a lot of fighting going on. I think this is what's going to happen with Saul and David. All of this is going to be internalized, and Saul is going to be a very jealous guy. He tries to kill David while David was playing, trying to calm him down. In the 18th chapter, in verse 8, well, we talked about that. Verse 10, and it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. So there was some prophesying going on here too. The evil spirit of the Lord seems to have an effect on Saul where he's prophesying. Remember when he went, this is the second time this has happened, by the way, brothers and sisters, too. Remember he went to look for his father's donkeys, and, that was one of the things is Saul now with the prophets, because he was prophesying with the prophets as well. So it seems like Saul had a propensity for this kind of, aggressive is probably the word, but like evangelical kind of stuff, where he's prophesying and he's very animated spiritually. And so this is what's going on here. And David played with his hand as with other times. So Saul's kind of in this manic state. And they're like, hey, David, come on in. We're going to calm this guy down. The king's out of control. David goes in there. He's playing a nice song, but it's not helping. What does it say? And there was a javelin in Saul's hand. So you can imagine he's got a javelin in his hand. He's talking crazy talk in the house. People are concerned. So it's David's responsibility to go in and play with this madman, right? Da, 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 everything's fine. Favorite song. And it wasn't helping. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So this was, David almost died here at the hand of Saul. He was ready to get him, ready to kill him. Yes, Mark?
I was just looking at the end of chapter 17 after David slays Goliath, and Saul asks Abner who this guy is. And does this point to Saul's mental state? Because he had met David already. We're told a few chapters earlier he went to Jesse and he met David and inquired, hey, can I have your son so he could play the instruments for me and do this stuff? So, or is it just that there are so many people in the army he didn't know it was David?
Yeah, I've thought about that too, Mark.
Kind of strange.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. My thoughts on it is, I think with the chaos of the war and the battle and stuff like that was going on, Saul didn't really know who had really done it. But you're right, because he had a conversation with Saul. In fact, Saul gave him his armor as well, and David's like, I haven't proved this. It's too big for me.
Right. And
so, I think, we don't know. Like Saul, I think the stress, whenever Saul was under stress, this is what happens. And I think he just kind of lost track of people and lost track of time, and he didn't know what was going on at this point in time. Like, who is this? And it's almost like Abner's like, what do you mean, who is this?
Yeah.
It's David. So you should know this guy.
You get these throughout the episodes that kind of point to how Saul was.
Yeah, and like with this one too, he goes from loving David But one little thing turns him completely against him because the women said he killed more people than Saul. So he was not a stable guy towards the end of his reign. At the beginning of his reign, Saul was very committed to being king, and he was a humble guy in his own eyes. Once he kind of became king in his own mind, he had a lot of these bad character traits that came out, unfortunately. But yeah, great question, Mark, for sure. It's interesting, like, what was Saul's problem? You forgot about, David? I don't know. Anyways, so this relationship obviously is not great, but you can see David, obviously, not David, but Saul kind of playing games here. Michal loved David. So Saul is going to manipulate this relationship, to bring David in. This was a way that, that Saul could maybe kill David, because he sends them out on this crazy raiding operation where he needs to kill, I think, 100 Philistines and bring back the foreskins, as a memento. And so, I think Saul in his mind is like, there's no way David's going to do this. He'll probably get killed doing it. Set him up. Kind of like what David did with Uriah. Know what I'm saying? This is the thought process. Saul is using this thought process to try to kill David. David's going to use that same exact thought process, the manipulation to try to get somebody killed. But David is victorious. He's victorious, and his legend kind of grows and grows and grows, much to the consternation of Saul. Saul's getting smaller and smaller in the eyes of the people. David's getting bigger and bigger in the eyes of the people. David's becoming more wise. He's becoming more stable. His leadership qualities are blossoming. Saul is an angry, confused guy. So who are people going to look to? Well, Jonathan certainly, right? Jonathan was a great leader as well. David and Jonathan are tight, right? It says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, right? Knit, that's a great analogy. Sewing it together. We're tight, we're best friends. And they were both very spiritual individuals. Okay, Jonathan probably was older than David, most likely. But anyways, so David is now part of Saul's house. He's in the house of Saul. David, married. If David and Michal were to have children, they would be the King Saul's granddaughters, right? You're in now. Grandchildren tend to change a whole dynamic in a family sometimes, right? You guys know. All right. We just talked about this. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. So that's interesting as well. You can see how popular David was, to the point where even, the next in line, the crown prince, so to speak, right, to use kind of a modern analogy, modern verbiage, he was the crown prince of Israel. If something were to happen to Saul, Jonathan would be king. And Saul chastises Jonathan for this. What are you doing? He's going to take the kingdom from you. And Jonathan's like, well, what's your problem? He's done nothing but help you. And so there was confrontation there. In fact, what did Saul try to do to Jonathan? Tried to kill him, right? And then there was a big fight there, and it says that Jonathan arose from the table in great anger. So now you have the crown prince of Israel and the king of Israel at each other's throats, Saul's trying to kill his own son because of the relationship that he has with David. Saul is completely losing the plot, right? He's just lashing out at anybody and everything. Jonathan gives David his robe, armor, and weapons, almost like saying, and this is from the 18th chapter, almost like saying, giving him, the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. His robe, armor, and weapons. You're the next in line. He's giving up the throne to give it to David as the anointed. Jonathan wasn't anointed. Saul was anointed. David was anointed. And they made a covenant of friendship, renewed multiple times. And Jonathan is going to protect David from Saul as well. And it's going to cause significant friction between Jonathan and his father Saul. And it's going to get really so bad, unfortunately, that there's no way that David can kind of stay around in the palace and, near Saul. It's just not going to work out because, you're starting to build different factions within the government. Oh, pro-David, right? The pro-David and Jonathan faction, the pro-Saul faction, right? All right. Also in the mix, you have Abner, who is Saul's brother, okay? Powerful warrior in his own right. Really the kingmaker. Because after Saul dies, David isn't going to become king of all Israel. In fact, he's just going to be king down in Hebron for 7 years. And Ishbosheth is going to be king up in the north. He's going to take over the kingdom from his father Saul. And who is it kind of the power behind the throne? Abner. And in fact, we'll get into this, but Abner is going to use his power to kind of, because there was a tiff between Ishbosheth and Abner about a concubine. And Abner was offended, and he's like, "That's it. I'm going to give all the power now to David." And Ishbosheth was afraid of Abner because he was the power behind the throne. It's a cool little picture right here. This was made in the 1500s by some I forget his name, Italian painter. But you have Jonathan and David. It's David. David always carried around Goliath's head, as we're told, right? He carried it around. Obviously, he didn't carry it around, but the painter is making a point of which is David and which is Jonathan, right? He's got the head of, I guess this is after the battle. So pretty interesting. I saw it. I had a little chuckle to myself. I go, oh, I guess that is David. All right, questions, comments? Boom. David is going to flee for his life. Saul was going to kill him. There was no, placating Saul or trying to change his mind. Saul now is just dedicated to the destruction of David. He recognizes now that David is the anointed of God. And this is, it's very indicative, brothers and sisters, of human pride. Saul knew that this was all from the Lord. He had these conversations with Samuel. Samuel was very clear. Saul knew exactly what was going on, and he's trying to prevent God's will by his own human power. And you can see Saul's pride. He's king. No one's going to take it from me, not even God. I'm going to keep the king. I'm going to keep the kingship. David, I don't care if he's anointed of God or not, I'm going to kill him. And so Saul is completely forgetting about what was told to him by the prophet Samuel, that the kingdom would be rent from him. Saul's like, nah, I don't think so. I'm keeping my kingdom. I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm the king. No one else is as powerful as me. And he got into that mindset. Hubris, pride, right? Deadly pride. And it's going to get him in the end. Michael and David loved each other at this point. And Michael is going to help David escape through a window. You can see the picture right there. Put some type of, statue inside of the bed, covered it up, put a little goat's hair action on it, to kind of trick, Saul had his men. Just goes to show you that, it wasn't just Saul against everybody else. People still listened to Saul. Saul was still loved by people. Okay, he was the king. So the king says, hey, go kill David. There were people that were willing to do that, to fight to the death for Saul. And Saul's men are go. And, this is really like the first example where David, by the skin of his teeth, was able to get away from Saul. But it's interesting after this, brothers and sisters, I don't know if David saw Michal after this, until, in fact, she's going to be given to somebody else. Penuel? I can't remember the name. Anyways, really sad scene afterward when she goes back with David, kind of in this loveless marriage, right? Just for the politics of it, and there's going to be, Michal is going to be really resentful to David. David's going to be resentful to her. And so that marriage, unfortunately, did not survive. David being an outlaw. He was away from her for all this time, years and years. In fact, had a few other wives in the meantime. So, and this oftentimes would happen in a political marriage, right? just politics. I don't really care for this person. I'm just doing it to combine families so we can stop fighting each other. He goes to Samuel, right? He goes to Naoth to Samuel, where one of Samuel's places were. Samuel is getting old at this time, and David needed some encouragement. I'm sure he's saying, hey, Samuel, I thought I was the anointed. Why am I on the run? Why is this happening to me? We can think that way too. And when we go through trials and tribulations, why is this happening to me? I thought God was going to be with me at all times. And He is with us at all times. But we're told we're going to go through trials and tribulations. We're going to go through suffering. We're going to go through things that we don't care for, that are uncomfortable, that are hurtful. And that was true of David as well. And this is going to refine his character. This time as an outlaw is going to refine his character even more. His dependence upon God is going to be very evident, certainly from the Psalms, but also from the account of his life as well. He always trusted in God. He always strengthened himself in God. One of the things that pops to mind is when Ziklag was burnt by fire by the Amalekites. It was awful. Everything was taken from them. Family, children, everything, gone. It says that David strengthened himself in the Lord, even though it says that the people wanted to stone him to death. They were so upset. Completely understandable. He takes Goliath's sword. It was actually at Nob where the priests were, where the temple was set up, the tabernacle was set up at this time. And the Goliath's sword was actually brought as an offering to Yahweh. And this would happen as well. You would take something from an enemy and you would offer it to your God. In this case, it was Yahweh. Remember what the Philistines did with the Ark of the Covenant? Remember, they brought it, they captured it, and they brought it to Dagon, and they set it right before Dagon. This is your offering. And then Dagon fell over. Thunk. So, all right. David starts playing political games too, right? He's like, listen, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and he turns to the Philistines for protection. Interesting. This kind of reminds me a little bit of like Joash. Obviously we know Joash was a good king, but Joash was playing political games too with the Egyptians and with Babylon, right? And those political games got him into trouble. He's eventually going to be killed by the king of Pharaoh Necho. Was it Pharaoh Necho? One of the pharaohs. Anyways, is going to kill him, and he's going to lose his life. But with David here, he goes to Gath, for protection, but then he got scared because the people were like, who's this? He's the one that killed Goliath. Imagine this scene, brothers and sisters. You have the Goliath, the giant slayer, coming to Gath and saying, hey, I'm on your side now. I want to fight for you. And everyone's like, nah, this is some kind of trick. The servants of Achish, King Achish, said, what is this guy doing here? Get him out of here. And so David got very scared, and he started to act like a crazy person, right? That's not too hard to do, right? I could probably act like a crazy person pretty easily. And King Achish is like, what is this guy? Get this guy out of here. He's a crazy person. So he escaped, by being, a little, pretending to be crazy. It's interesting, brothers and sisters, that David got himself into this situation, right? He thought it was the best course of action when he was thinking about it. You wonder if he asked God for direction with this, or he just said, look, I'm out of options. I have to go to the Philistines. I don't know. But he did write a psalm about this. I can't remember off the top of my head. We could probably Google it. But he writes a psalm about this when he was, and in the psalm it talks about him being overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. He was scared. And sometimes we can get scared about events. And we can make rash decisions that sometimes don't help the situation. And so in situations like this, we have to slow our thinking. We have to turn to God in prayer. Okay? He will direct our steps. With David, I think he was just, it was kind of like Abraham, going down to Egypt and telling this kind of like half-truth about Sarah being his sister, right? Yeah, half-sister, you're married though, right? And so that caused more problems than it solved. So, David's in a real strait here. He can't go he goes to the Philistines. That didn't work out. So where does he go? Well, he goes into the wilderness. He goes into the wilderness with 400 other kind of like society's outcasts, right? It says, well, let's take a look at this in 1 Samuel 22. Yeah, Achish says, Lo, you see the man is mad. Wherefore then have you brought him to me? Have I need of a madman that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Get him out of here. Don't need him. Okay? David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. The next few verses there tells us that David is going to move his family to Moab. David was he had Moabite blood in him, right, through Ruth. He was of the line of Ruth and Boaz, so seems like they still had connections, because he's going to go and talk to the king of Moab. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, David's talking to the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray you, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. So his family comes, and David's like, you guys, listen, you guys are too precious for me. Go back to Moab for a period of time. And so David obviously must have had these connections already, as being part of, he was a noble. He was part of the ruling elite of Israel at this time. He would have known the other players or the other kings and the other leaders in this area. And it sounds like he knew the king of Moab, which is interesting to me, right? We're like, oh, David talked to the king of Moab. It's kind of like, and Rich Deneen talked to President Trump, right? It's a different environment. David had a relationship, it sounds like, with the king of Moab for whatever reason. All right. David is going to escape to Adullam. It's going to be his area of operation. And Saul is going to kill Doeg, right? Doeg the Edomite. Saul is going to say, to his soldiers, go and kill the priest, because they helped David. They gave him bread. They gave him the sword as well. And he's going to say to his men, Saul is going to say to his men, go and kill the priests of the Lord. And they wouldn't. They were afraid. Not going to do it. But the Edomite, Doeg, he had no problem killing the priests, right? And this was an awful, awful scene, right? All the priests of God, save one, was killed by an Edomite at the direction of Saul, King Saul. Not great. David is going to rescue Keilah from the Philistines, but this was the type of thing too that he asked God, will they turn me over to Saul? And God said, yes, they will. So imagine that. They're saved by the Philistines, but they were going to turn David over to Saul as well. And the Ziphites as well. There was another group of people that betrayed David's location. I think this was the time where they were on the mountain, and David just kind of goes over because Saul was coming at the right time, and he just got away. There's a couple times where David just gets away from Saul. And that was really his life of an outlaw. Eventually, as we're going to see probably next week, Saul eventually gets tired of chasing him, and they come to some kind of truce, right? There's a truce that they don't see each other again. And David goes his way, and Saul goes back. And that's kind of how it ends.